As a teacher, I deal with my fair share of teenage attitudes, teenage moods, and I've decided that 8th graders, they're the worst. 8th graders don't know if they want to hug you or hit you. There's like so much going on in their brains. But, kids sometimes can get an attitude. Those of you who have had children in your life know that kids at times can have a bit of a tude. And I remember one time I was teaching financial literacy, and this girl came in my room and she was in a mood. And she was being kind of snippy and snarky and just kind of rude. And so I called her out on it. And then she got snippy, even snarkier and snippy with me. And so then I got sarcastic and snarky back with her. And then it just kind of started to escalate. And I could tell that it was heading in a bad direction. And so I said, you know what? You just need to go out in the hallway. Since I'm not allowed to go in the hallway, I made her go out in the hallway so we could both get it together. And so she went out in the hallway and I got my emotions in check. And that process is hard sometimes. That process of getting your emotions in check can be a challenge. And it's easier as an adult. We learn to do this, right? Like you guys remember what it was like if you've ever been around kids when they lose their mind over stupid stuff, especially toddlers. Here, I got some examples for you. Oh wait, go here. Oh, I'll come back. I've got samples for you. So you understand that process of losing it, right? How many of you, now be honest, have ever been so mad that you broke something? You smashed something? I got a couple of this. Okay. How many of you have ever been so mad you said something that later you're like, oh man, I should not have said that? Yeah. How many of you have ever just gotten so mad that you acted in a way that afterwards you're like, oh, shoot. I wish I could go back in time and redo that one, right? We've all done it. We've all lost our minds. My friend, when she gets so mad, she says she sees red. She turns kind of red when she gets really mad. And she says she actually sees red when she's really, really mad. I've heard that phrase before. I just thought it was a euphemism. But she says she actually it's like a red comes over her vision. And she is so angry. We've all been there. We've all kind of lost it. Okay, so as a teacher, I'm going to give you a little science lesson in losing it real quick. So in your brain, there's this tiny, it's the size of a pecan, maybe the size of a cherry, probably not that big, an olive. It's about the size of an olive. There's this little gland in your brain called the amygdala, and it's in the very epicenter of your brain. It's in the very, very middle of your brain. And the amygdala does a lot of stuff. But one thing the amygdala does that's important to what we're talking about today is it manages the fight or flight response. Who remembers anything about this from science class, 5th grade science? You guys remember fight or flight? Roxanne does. Fight or flight is when I sense danger, my body is oh snap, we're in danger. I've got to be ready to either fight or flee. So if a tiger walked into this room, I have two choices. I either have to fight the tiger or run faster than at least one of you and get away from the tiger, right? So fight or flight is what happens, and then when that happens is your brain shuts down everything that doesn't have to do with fighting or fleeing. So the logical part of our brain is right here in the frontal cortex. The logical part of your brain gets shut down because your brain's we do not have time for you to analyze and think about what is the best way to deal with this situation. We've got to run. So all of these other hormones are released in our body. So we our muscles get more oxygen, our heart and our lungs get more, our eyes dilate, we can hear better, our senses go on high alert so we can either fight or run away, fight or flight. When we get angry, when we're overwhelmed, that fight or flight response kicks in. It turns on. And it shuts down the thinking part of our brain. This is why we break things or say things that we shouldn't say, because the thinking part of our brain has been turned off. And that we learn as we get older to fight that. You know, like when I think about this teenage girl, she was struggling with that. Her brain was hijacked. They call it an amygdala hijack. I've also heard it called flooding. The amygdala, that little gland, hijacks your brain. It takes your brain hostage, and it does what it wants to do, and it doesn't care about anything else. An amygdala hijack. Well, there's a way that we can stop an amygdala hijack. Like, you're still going to be mad, but we can stop that amygdala from taking over your brain. I'm going to give you 3 easy steps. So when you feel that trigger, something just really makes you mad, you start to see red, you feel like, the first thing you need to do is say your name and the word stop. So for me, I'd be like, Stephanie, stop. And that just kind of like, it kind of wakes your brain up, like, oh, hold on, something's going on. And then you breathe deeply a couple times, and that puts more oxygen into your brain so your brain can do what you want it to. And then you need to think about something. Try to divide 450 by 25. Try to name all the Major League Basketball or teams. Do something that requires thought. What happens there is that if you activate the frontal lobe of your brain, when the amygdala tries to shut it down, it's like, hold on, I'm in the middle of something. You can't shut me down. I'm in the middle of doing something. Now, you'll still be mad, but if you can do these 3 things, when you feel that trigger come on, you can keep the thinking part of your brain in the game. And that'll help you not say the thing that you're going to regret, break the thing that you're going to regret breaking, do the thing that you're going to regret doing. It helps you control the process. You'll still be angry, but you won't hopefully make regrettable mistakes because the amygdala won't have time to hijack your brain. Okay? Anger is a normal thing. Even animals feel it. Those of you who have had pets, have you ever had a pet that you know they're mad at you? Like they are mad. Like we had a dog years ago. Whenever my parents would have a guest, after the guest would leave, she'd go upstairs and poop in the hallway by their room to show her displeasure. Or if you've ever had a cat that pees in your shoe. I've heard of people having cats that pee in their shoe because they're mad at you, or they get mad and they tear something up. They find something of yours that they know you like and they tear it up because they're mad at you. Okay, even pets get mad. Animals get mad. Anger is a normal process, and anger itself is not a sin. Jesus got angry, and Jesus never sinned. So anger itself is not a process, or it's not a sin. But we need to learn to control it. Controlling our anger is part of the maturation process. When I think of little kids, they throw a fit, right? And even Paul, he was trying to say he wrote letters. Paul the apostle wrote letters to all of his churches. And he would go and plant a church, and then he would leave, and he would get reports of what was happening. And then he'd write them letters to give them encouragement and guidance. Well, he had gotten a letter from the Colossians that wasn't great. And so he's writing them a letter to encourage and kind of instruct them, right? Because they're acting in anger. They're acting out in their anger that's in a bad way. So he says this in Colossians. He says, put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you. Sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desires, covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming. He's like, God, this stuff is bad. And you don't want to pander in it. You don't want to be a part of this. And I would think we can all look at this list and be like, yeah, that stuff's bad. I understand I shouldn't do that if I'm going to be a person who's running after Christ. But then he goes on, he says, in these you once walked. He's like, that's your old self. That's the immature you. That's the childish you. You're not a kid anymore. Now that when you give your life to Christ, you're not a kid anymore. You're putting on Christ. And he says, here's some more. In true Jesus fashion, he's like, oh, you can all agree that's bad? Let me give you a little bigger list that'll make you squirm. He says, you also need to put away anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk. How many of us, and I'm totally guilty of this, have been angry and said something wrathful, said something malicious, slandered somebody, said terrible things about somebody? We get mad and we spout off, or we go to someone else, well, can you believe what she said? She said, and we get all like 8th graders, like, they do this. They wag their heads. I can tell when 8th graders are having a situation because they're huddled up and somebody's doing this. Right? But we do that, we get mad, and we find somebody who we think will be a sympathetic ear, and we start telling them all the terrible things that person did and what a jerk they are, and we just bleh, all over them. And Paul's like, that's immature. That's not the you that you need to be. You're being like this. Here's my pictures I wanted to show you earlier. These crack me up. I love these are when kids cry for stupid reasons. So the first one, she wanted ravioli for dinner. So I made her ravioli, and she didn't want ravioli for dinner. Or the face of someone whose mom wouldn't let him hold his own poop. I killed a bug in the laundry room. Apparently, it was her best friend. Or I told her she couldn't get into the dishwasher. Paul is saying when we lose our minds, when we let the amygdala hijack our brain, when we speak maliciously, when we slander someone in our anger, this is what we are. We're the 2-year-old who's mad because they can't hold their own poop. I didn't put my favorite one up here. It was a little kid holding a maxi pad. And the mom's like, she's mad because I won't let her keep her sticker. But we don't want to be like this. We don't want to be, to God's eyes, I think to myself sometimes, how often does God look at me like this? Like, Stephanie, you're losing your mind over something that you should not be. When we are in Christ, we put on the clothes of Christ, and we're supposed to be better than that. We're supposed to be more mature. We're supposed to be people who can control our emotions. He says instead we need to put on then as God's holy ones, holy and beloved. We're supposed to be putting on compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. We're supposed to be bearing with one another. And if we have a complaint, we've got to forgive as the Lord has forgiven us. So when someone does something really dumb to you, someone disagrees with you, someone cuts you off in traffic, someone doesn't do something they said they would do, instead of spouting off and getting mad and punching them in the face or breaking something or telling everybody what a jerk they are, our job is to be compassionate and kind and meek and patient and bear with them and forgive them, which is harder. But that takes a maturity, right? So back to my story. Let me make sure I finish that verse. So you must also forgive, and above all these, put on love, because love binds everything together in perfect harmony. So back to my story of the teenage girl. I put her in the hallway. I got it together. And I went out, and I have found with kids, the best thing to do is to ask them what's wrong first. I had every right as a teacher to send her to the office and write her up and give her a detention because that's what she deserved in that moment. She was being disrespectful to a teacher, and you don't do that. But instead, I sent her out in the hallway, and then I stepped out into the hallway and I said, hey, what's going on? And she's like, you were so rude to me, and I understand that I was rude to you, but you got mean and snarky with me. Why are teachers allowed to get sarcastic and snarky with students, but we're not allowed to get snarky back? That's not fair. I said, you're right. That's not fair. And I said, I apologize, because I got snarky with her. I started to lose it. That amygdala was trying to hijack my brain, and I started to get snarky with her. And that's when I recognized it and I sent her out. And so I said, you're right. I shouldn't have done that to you. I apologize. I should not have said that to you. And I said, is that it? Like, is that all that's going on? This is not normal behavior for you. She says, well, actually, I'm really stressed out because my parents are getting a divorce. And so what I have found is a lot of times when people misbehave, it's because something's going on. Something is happening in their lives that you don't realize. They're dealing with a loss of something. They feel like they have no control in their lives. They feel like that they're unloved. They feel they're scared about something. You never know what someone's dealing with because we're all really good at hiding the junk in our lives. And so when you encounter someone who's being a real jerk, we've got to understand there's probably a reason for that. I mean, some people that's just the way they act. But by and large, most people, their default is not to be a jerk. Think about really little kids. For the most part, they are sweet and kind. Something happens to them along the way to make them not be sweet and kind. And so when we encounter someone who's being a jerk, we've got to remember that there's probably something else going on. And sometimes we just disagree. Sometimes people just say something we're like, that was dumb. That made me mad. Or you thought you were joking, but that really hurt my feelings. Or there might be something going on in you. I had friends years ago, they gave me a nickname and I really did not like it. But they thought they were teasing me, and so they thought we were all kidding. And so they would use it, and I was not having it. Well, we were playing volleyball, and I got so mad, I just left. I just got off and they're like, what are you doing? I said, I don't want to be called that. Like, I was so mad about it. And they thought they were kidding. Like, they were just joking around, but it made me really mad. And maybe I didn't deal with it in the best way, but I told my friends, like, I don't like to be called that, and I need you to stop. And sometimes we just need to draw some boundaries. But for the most part, you got to remember there's something going on underneath. And our job as Christians is to be more mature, to be a people of love. So when you've given your heart to the Lord, you are supposed to remember that it's about love and kindness. And the Colossians weren't the only ones who needed this advice. I was reading today, and it's funny because I had written it down as a verse to use, and then today it was the verse that God told me to read. And I was like, I should put that in my sermon. And I'm like, it's already there. But in Ephesians, so Paul had to give similar advice to the Ephesians. He says, you guys, in your anger, don't sin. Don't let the sun go down while you're angry, and don't give the devil a foothold. The Ephesians were also acting out in anger. He's like, you guys, look, it's okay to be angry. What's not okay is to not forgive. What's not okay is to stew about it. How many of us get mad and we just simmer? We sit there and we stew and we stew and we stew on it, and that stewing allows the devil to come in. When we sit there in anger and we let the sun go down in our anger and we allow ourselves to simmer and to keep thinking about it, we are opening up the door and saying, bitterness, the enemy, come on in. Our job as Christians is when we get angry to get that amygdala under control, and in love, deal with our anger. In love, go and talk to that person. In love, forgive that person. Because if we hold on to that anger and we let it sit in us, it roots in us, a poisonous plant. Our job is to focus on what is good. Our job is to forgive. And so your homework this week, I want you to think about a time when you lost it. A time where you broke something, where you said something you shouldn't have said, when you blew your top. And I want you to imagine yourself going through the process. So you imagine what that trigger was. Figure out what your triggers are, because we all have them. Figure out what your triggers are. Imagine that one specific trigger. And then I want you to picture what it would have been like if you would have done Stephanie, stop. Oh, wrong way. Stephanie, stop. 450 divided by 25. And I'm thinking. And then I want you to imagine what that situation would have looked like had you not lost your temper. Because a lot of times when we get past it, we find out what really was happening. How might that have gone down if you were able to not lose your mind? If you were able in love to say, what's really going on here? And that person could tell you, well, by the way, my parents are going through a divorce, or I've got this terrible thing happening in my life. How might we have been able to serve the people who we were in that conflict with better had we been able to maintain control of our brain? Had we dealt with it in love? Had we forgiven right away instead of holding on to that anger and letting it just grow its nasty, gnarly roots in our hearts? So this week, imagine a time when you lost your mind, where you blew your top, where the amygdala hijacked your brain. I want you to imagine what it could have been like had you not done that, had you not let your amygdala take over your brain. And all of God's people said, amen. All right, if you have not surrendered your heart to the Lord, if you have not said yes to Jesus, I want to invite you to come down during this song, and you can do that, or you can come see me after service, and we'll walk you through that process.